No.
Hi, this is Twigs Way from Parsons Warren, and this is another in our series of videos on identifying forage plants, and also actually we've added in some garden plants now to our videos. So if you like the videos, please pop over to our Facebook page, Parsons Warren, and then also at the very end of this video there'll be a little guide to how you can put a donation in for Parsons Warren Rabbit Sanctuary. So today I'm going to look at willow. Now many of you will think I couldn't mistake a willow. However, there are very many kinds of willow, and one of the things I tend to find is that people think they haven't got any willow in their area because they haven't got a weeping willow. So we're going to look at weeping willows, and then we're going to look at the other kinds of willow that you may have, even if you haven't got a weeping willow. So fairly obviously, this one is a weeping willow. It's in the middle of our garden, which is very convenient for us. It's called Salix babylonica, which is all to do with the idea of, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept. And it has a weeping form, which many trees do actually. A lot of trees have one variety that will be a weeping form. It has long, thin leaves. The leaves are alternate along the stems, if you can see. There you go. So you've got one coming off there, one coming off there, one coming off there, then the other side. So they're alternately arranged along the stem. By the way, there's no need to be worried about handling it, so that's not why I'm wearing gloves today. I'm wearing gloves today because it's absolutely freezing. Having been 23 degrees yesterday, it's now 9 degrees, so I'm in gloves now. So it's fairly distinctive, lance-shaped leaves, very much like the top of a lance. A single vein or a single ridge at the back, and the back of the leaf is a lot grayer. As is common with many plants, it's grayer on the back, but not perhaps as grey as white willow. So, to be honest, your weeping willow, your Salix babylonica, is fairly unmistakable if you've got it. But there are several other willows which you may have out in the wild, even if you haven't got this one, because weeping willow is very much a tree of decorative parklands, gardens, and a lot of, there used to be a lot where we were on the new estates of Cambridge, so they were used there, Cambridge, around the water's edge. So let's go and have a look at some of the other ones that you may have, even if you haven't got a weeping willow. So we just had a look at the weeping willow, which is most often found in parks and gardens. But there are several other kinds of willow that you might come across. So there's the crack or grey willows that you'll find lining rivers, often the crack willow, often a pollarded one. You'll find grey willows, often in hedge lines, and we're going to have a look at that in a minute. But also if you've got an area of ditches or a damp area, you may also have an osier willow. Now this is one of the ones that people really often don't realise that it's a willow, because they're very, very narrow leaves, and it usually is shooting upwards. It's quite a dark leaf. It's so thin, the leaves on it. But actually, if you come in close to it, again, you'll see that very typically these leaves are alternate. They're dark, they're slightly glossier, exactly the same as the weeping willow, rather narrower, and of course, rather than weeping, they're stretching upwards. Typically when you see them, it just looks a lot darker than the weeping willow and lots finer. I have to say, some people even mistake it for, I don't know, something like a bamboo or something, because it's shooting up, particularly if, like this one in this hedge, it's had a real severe cutting and it's all boosted up at once, so people don't realise that this is a willow. And I should add, of course, that all of the willows that we looked at today are equally edible and usable as forage. We're going to talk a little bit about when you shouldn't use them, if rabbits are on medications, but all of the salix, which willows are, whether they're Salix babylonica, Salix capra, or Salix alba, they are all edible. So our next one is slightly different. Actually, I'm going to look at this example. And this is also a willow, but this is the one that people really don't realise is a willow. So this has, in fact, this is one of our goat willows, and because it has a much more rounded leaf. So again, the leaves are alternate, but then they often are in a lot of trees. Slightly greyer at the back. It's got that one vein up the back that's very clear. Now, some of the hybrid goat willows have a tiny little pair of kind of leaflets at the bottom, or ears at the bottom of the leaf. This is not one of the hybrid ones. Generally speaking, these are called sallows traditionally, so you get a great sallow and a hybrid sallow. This one is very distinctive at the moment. So this is a goat willow, this is Salix capra. This is very distinctive at the moment because it's the pussy willow basically, and these are its little what would have been the lovely little smooth velvety bits of pussy willow that have actually grown and flowered and are now showing in this lovely fluffy form. And if we could just spin around a minute without making everybody seasick, can we see that one down there that's gone kind of brown and fluffy? And that's one that's gone completely fluffy. So there's another one up here. So you will find they do have male and female. So this one has the same leaves but doesn't have any of those on. So that's our weeping willow, our osier willow, and our goat willow. So that leaves us with our grey or white willow, Salix alba, equally edible. And there's actually a line of these growing in a hedgerow out there. The leaves are very similar to the weeping willow. It's a bit difficult to say this today because it's so overcast now. In fact, it's beginning to drizzle. However, when you see them in the hedgerow, they do look grey. It's the undersides of the leaves, because they're a very upright tree and quite sparse actually often. The wind catches the leaves, turns them around, and they look a very grey willow, and they're called white or grey willows. So you'll often see those in a hedgerow. What I'm going to do is actually cut a little bit off each of these, take them home, and then just film those together, the 4 or 5 different types that I can get, so that you can compare them. Okay. So this is what's called the white willow, crack willow. And this is a much more, obviously this is an upright tree. It's a large tree, very much the same scale as the weeping willow might be. But you see this a lot more in hedgerows rather than as a specimen tree. So this one is in a line, an old hedge line. It's got a much greyer leaf, both at the front and the back. It's got almost a silvery sheen to it. This one's looking a bit yellow because it's got catkins on it, but it's almost a slightly silvery sheen to the new growth, and then very grey at the back. And when the wind catches it, you can really see that kind of greyish white colour. So very distinctive. Also, like many of the willows, it has on the new growth, the stems are slightly yellow looking. So that again is distinctive of some willows with their new growth. Certainly on the weeping willow, you'll get that as well. Again, because it's a willow, you get the alternate, and in this case, the slightly lance-like leaves. They're kind of almost an intermediate, to be honest, between the weeping willow and something like the goat willow. So, and you've got the slightly different catkins to the ones that you had on your pussy willow. So it's quite a range of willows. So I'm going to take these back, line them up so you get good detailed photographs of them, so that you can find out if maybe you do have a willow, even if you don't have a weeping willow in the middle of. So we've come back in now to do the inside bit of willow identification. Just to say again that all of these, although they look different, are actually salix. So they are for rabbits to eat and very popular. I will, though, towards the end of this video, talk about how you shouldn't give this to when a rabbit is already on certain kinds of medicine, or indeed probably any medicines. So please do stay tuned until that important bit at the very end. So first of all, we have our weeping willows. I have actually put all these willows kind of in the direction that you'd find them. So I've kind of put this one upside down. So here is our weeping willow, Salix babylonica. There is another very similar one called Salix sepulchra, for its kind of being planted near cemeteries. But anyway, this is the one you're most likely to find. Very, very thin leaves, grayer on the back, very standard ridging there, and really pretty unmistakable. If I just sort of swing us slowly up so that hopefully you can see the enormous great weeping willow in the garden. Though it has to be said, ours has a sort of lollipop effect at the moment because we did quite a lot of collecting of willow from it to dry it at the end of last year. And willow does dry remarkably well. Literally just cut off huge great strands of it and hang it up somewhere dry, and it will dry beautifully. The one next to it is quite interesting. You may not see it an awful lot except in botanic gardens, but if you want to grow a willow tree, a weeping willow tree, and fancy something a little bit out of the ordinary, this is actually Salix contorta, which is, as it says, a contorted willow tree. You get this kind of contortion, and just you can see it sort of twists and turns, both the twigs and the leaves. And you can also get hazel, contorted hazel, Corylus contorta. And it is quite an attractive and unusual tree. And you can feed it just the same as you can feed a normal willow. So if you are looking for something to plant in the garden, then that's a good one. It does need quite a large garden, though. They do grow very tall. Salix contorta, not usually as wide as a normal weeping willow tree, taller but not as wide. But if you look at the way the leaves are arranged in this, you know, when you get down to the basics of leaf arrangement and leaf shape, they are the same. The next one up is the osier willow, because that was the next one up in the video when we were outside. So I'm doing them roughly in that order. So the osier willow, a very much darker green and upright. So if I hold this up as it would be, rather than down, and usually I think this one's beginning to droop, usually a very sort of upright set of leaves, a darker green colour, very, very fine. So going in the same order as we had outside, after our osier willow, we looked at the slightly more rounded leaf willows, and this is the one that you probably may have in a hedgerow near you and don't realise it's a willow. So these willows, which are alternatively actually known by the common name of sallows, are rather different. In that the leaves are much more rounded. Now, they also have a great deal of variation in them, to be honest. These sallows, as they're known commonly, although they're still a salix, do a great deal of hybridization between them. This one is probably the great sallow, which is the goat willow or Salix caprea. However,
Certainly, I would say this one seems to have hybridized itself very slightly with all the other sallows. So these are your original pussy willows, in fact, which later on produce this. Who would have thought that a pussy willow would then become quite odd, actually, but anyway. And then finally, we had our grey willow, or white willow. So as you can see, hopefully from this one, it's quite downy on the underside, and it has a lovely sheen, which when it's blowing in the wind gives it that white or grey look to it. So that's a white willow. These are also very closely related to, and indeed are confused with, may even be the same, as crack willow, which you commonly see pollarded along the riversides. Although I've got a bit bogged down in the identification and the Latin naming, please don't get that bogged down in them. You will, as I have today, I've had sort of 6 or 7 of my tree books out looking at all my willows. One of them didn't even include goat willow. One of them said white willow was the same as crack willow. One of them said that weeping willow sepulchre was the same as babylonica, and the other ones all disagreed violently. The best thing to do is just really think about the fact that not all willows are the standard weeping willow, and just because you can't see a weeping willow in your vicinity doesn't mean that you haven't got a really nice willow tree near you that you can then go and harvest for your rabbits. Willow comes in lots of different varieties. If you want to follow this up a little bit, then here are some of the books that I looked at today. So Trees in Britain by Roger Phillips. It's an old one. Again, I'm mostly showing you old ones that you can get from secondhand shops, Amazon, all the rest of it. Secondhand shops when we're let out from lockdown again. And as you can see, this has golden weeping willow, grey sallow, crack willow, brittle willow, contorted willow, black willow, bay willow, laurel-leaved willow, osier willow, and then also on a previous page, white willow and goat willow. So that's quite a lot to choose from. The nice thing about this book, though, if I can get the right pages, is that it also has all the different leaf shapes. Although, interestingly enough, it then divides its willows up. And it has most of them on one page. Then about 4 pages later, here we have our goat willow or pussy willow, because it's got a broader leaf. And that is a glitch with tree identification books and willows, because this one, which is the, believe it or not, the Reader's Digest book, it's embarrassing that really, has a beautiful entry for goat willow. But if you're wanting the rest of the willows, it's quite a lot later. I have to say, this book, though it's a very old Reader's Digest book, is very, very good on its identification. And I would actually perhaps team this with one of the photographic books on identification. The Eyewitness handbooks, which are usually so good, I have to say, actually failed to identify several of the willows. Oops, I don't know how that happened. So that it didn't even have goat willow. Something that doesn't even have goat willow doesn't really get my vote. And then my own books, Gardening for Rabbits and Foraging for Rabbits. Gardening for Rabbits just comments that planting a willow tree is a long waiting game if you want to feed it to your rabbits. That's not true of osier willow, actually. Osier grows incredibly quickly. And indeed, even a weeping willow, my partner put in 2 little sticks that he'd cut off our weeping willow, jammed them into a wet bit in the hen meadow, and I noticed that about 3 years later, we seem to have 2 small trees. I'm not sure if I wanted 2 small trees where they are, but there you go. We now have 2 new small trees. So the Foraging for Rabbit books, which is in the same series as the Gardening for Rabbits, both available for Rabbit Welfare Association. And this has a picture just of the white willow, actually, I've put in there, but I have listed all the others. Now, finally, on the willow front, as I have been mentioning, Willow does actually have a very important chemical in it. Now, it has a chemical, salicin, and as in salix, salicin, and salicin is an anti-inflammatory, and it is used as a painkiller, so it's very much like our non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, so things like meloxicam or Metacam, and that means that you really shouldn't be feeding it to animals that already are taking an anti-inflammatory. The other thing is it can also act in humans anyway as a diuretic, and has another impact on several other drugs. Now, some people think that this is very much something that vets should be aware of, so that if you have got a rabbit that's on medicine, just mention it to your vets that you're going to feed some willow. Personally speaking, I don't tend to, because I don't think it's very easy to think how much is in the bark, how much is in the stem, how much is in the leaves, how much are they having. And in fact, I will notice that rabbits who have got perhaps some kind of underlying pain will really enjoy their willow. I don't know how much they're getting out of it though, but it's true that there should perhaps be a warning to go with this. And if you want to look at that in more detail, as with anything to do with the medicinal side of plant gathering for foraging for rabbits, then I always recommend the book by Eileen Walthall on wild nutrition and medicinal wild plants for pet rabbits, where she goes into detail on all the medicinal effects. As far as most of my rabbits are concerned, and I'm not sure if this is going to work actually, so we may just cut off this video very rapidly, but let's try giving a bit of, parsley pits suddenly become very busy with other bits. Hopefully, here we go. Here's a bit of willow. Oh, well, there you go. Yep, munchy, munch, munch. So that's just to say willow is very much liked by rabbits. So, right, with that little vision of parsley pit there, just to say thank you very much for watching these videos. Please do hop over to Parsley's Warren Facebook page and give us a PayPal donation if you could, and the details of that will come up just after I finish speaking. So thanks very much for watching this, and see you at one of our other videos.